In this video tutorial, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the vector shape tools here in Photoshop. So we're going to be looking at using the vector shape tools to recreate this frame that we see around the image here on the left. Now this frame is in a vector shape, so that enables us to not only share the custom shapes that we create with other Photoshop users, but we can also reuse these shapes in all kinds of different design layouts. And we can scale these to any size we want, unlike with Photoshop brushes, because we're in a vector format. So anytime we're working with vector shapes inside Photoshop, they can be scaled infinitely without any loss of quality. So vector shapes are a great resource for us in Photoshop, and there are lots of different vector shapes that we can download for free on the internet and experiment with and create all kinds of interesting designs. So we're going to show you all the different vector tools in Photoshop and how they work together to create some really interesting design elements for your layouts. So in this video, we're going to be primarily using the tools in Photoshop, although I am going to cheat a little bit and use some of the tools in Pixel Creator Pro just to kind of speed things along a little bit. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we need to do is create a new blank document to work with. So I'm going to use the new document function here in Pixel Creator Pro. And that's just going to create a blank document for us. I'm going to clear out the guidelines. I'm going to select the entire background canvas and I'm going to insert a texture. So I'm going to come into Bridge here. I have a texture selected, so I'll use the Insert Photo tool here in Pixel Creator Pro to drop in that texture file. And now with our texture file in place, I'm going to go ahead and begin constructing our frame. So the first step is to grab our rectangular selection tool here in Photoshop, and we're going to be using a fixed ratio selection. So up here in the options bar, we want to change it from the standard, which is normal. We want to go to fixed ratio, and we're going to do a 4:6 ratio. So any selection I make in my layout is going to be a 4:6 ratio. Now what we need to do is we need to create a series of guidelines around our selection. And so I'm going to choose B for border here in Pixel Creator Pro to create a series of guidelines around that selection. And then I'm going to use our guides tool in Pixel Creator Pro to add a margin around our selection. We're going to do a margin to the outside, which we're going to do negative 0.375. And that creates a new series of guides. So you can see that's quite a handy little tool for when you're doing this type of design work. Now the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to create a rectangle, but it's going to be a vector rectangle. So I'm going to use my vector rectangle tool here in Photoshop. And because I have these guides, I could just use the guides to draw out my rectangle. It'll snap right to those guidelines. And then I'm going to choose this option right here, which is to subtract from a shape area. And I'm going to use the inside set of guidelines to draw another rectangle. And that will actually cut a hole through my frame. And you can see that hole has been cut through. I'll go ahead and hit C for clear. And just to simplify things, I'm going to turn off the visibility of my frame for a moment. Now the next thing I need to do, if we look at our original configuration, we have this interesting little edge effect on our frame, which is kind of like a little notebook, spiral notebook edge. And so we're going to create that little design piece for us. Now I'm going to come into our custom shape tool here in Photoshop, and we've created a bunch of shapes that we call PhotoPerks, and we have all kinds of different collections. So if you already own some of our PhotoPerks, you'll be able to utilize these in ways that you maybe haven't thought of. And I should point out that I am going to provide you all of the shapes that I'm using throughout this demonstration. I'm going to provide these shapes to you so you'll be able to work through this tutorial and using the same shapes that I'm using. So this is the block, this is the photo block that I use. This collection is called our Photo Blocks Volume 2. And this is the block that I used. And I'm simply going to come in here and draw out my block shape. If I hold down my shift key, that'll constrain the proportions of my block so it's not stretched in any way. And what I need to do is I need to trim off all this area over here on the right hand side. So how do I do that in Photoshop? Well, you can see I have a new shape layer. I'm actually going to rename this layer. This is going to be our frame layer, and this will be our notebook edge layer, just so you can better differentiate the two layers. Okay, so I'm on my notebook layer, and I'm going to click on my vector layer mask over here to the right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my rectangle tool, and I'm going to choose the subtract from option up here in the options. So subtract from shape area, and I'm going to draw out a selection, and that's going to trim away all that excess photo block to the right. So I'm left with just this little strip, which is what I need for my frame that we're building. But you can see that the path still exists. You can see the rectangle that we created. We can see that path, and we can also see the path of the original photo block. And we want to get rid of all the excess path that we're not going to be using. So to do that, I'm going to switch right over here to our path selection tool. And when I choose the combine option, you can see that all that excess path has now vanished, and I just have just this little strip, which is exactly what I need. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn on my frame layer, and all I have to do is take that little piece of our notebook layer, and I'm just going to kind of nudge it over here a little bit, just move it over. We could use our arrow keys, or we could just pick it up and move it. And then I'm just going to resize it to fit this frame a little bit better. So I just use my free transform tool here in Photoshop to resize my frame layer to whatever I want. And I could stretch it however I want it to look, whatever you think looks good. Something about like so. Doesn't look too bad. Now what I do want to do though is I want to add some additional area over here on the left edge because I want to apply some text to my frame. So all I'm going to do here is use my arrow keys just to move my notebook edge over a little bit so I can make this frame on the left a bit wider to accommodate some text. So I'm going to click over here on my frame layer, and I'm on my vector layer mask, so I'll click on my vector layer mask, and then I'll choose this tool here, which is our direct selection tool in Photoshop, and I'm just going to select just the very left edge of this frame. You can see that selection I have made. As soon as I let go of my mouse, I get these two little control points, and again I'm just using my arrow keys to widen that out. So now I have a nice area where I can have some text there. Okay. So now what I need to do though is I have a notebook edge layer and my frame layer, and I need to have both of those pieces on one layer. Now if we have Pixel Creator Pro, we can simply select the two shape layers and we can click merge apertures, and Pixel Creator will take those two shape layers and combine them for us. If we're not using Pixel Creator Pro, we can do that in Photoshop. And the way we do that in Photoshop is to click on our notebook layer on the vector layer mask and choose edit copy. And then we have to click on our frame layer and choose edit paste. Now we've copied the path that was on our notebook layer to our frame layer, so we no longer need our notebook layer at all. Now you can see on our frame layer here that the notebook edge and our original frame layer, when we copy the two paths together, there is some overlap happening here. So to get rid of the overlap, all we need to do is click on our path selection tool and choose the combine option, and that'll combine the two paths together, and you can see where the overlapping was is now just done away with. There is no more overlap. So that takes care of that situation. The next thing to do is add our text. So we'll simply grab our text tool, and I'm going to type in some text, and we'll do HMS 2010. And then I'm going to simply rotate our text 90 degrees. and then reposition the text over the area where we have to resize it to fit it within our frame. And there is our text in place. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert my text layer to a shape layer. And I do that by coming over here to the Layers palette, right-clicking, and choose the Convert to Shape option. And just like before, I need to copy this vector layer mask, so we'll choose Edit, Copy. And then I'm going to paste it to our frame layer. So we'll choose Edit and Paste. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete the text layer because we no longer need it. Now, I'm on my vector layer mask on my frame layer, and we can see the outline of that path that we copied from our text layer. We can see the HMS 2010, but if I'm not on my vector layer mask, you can see that we don't see the text, we don't see that path. And so what we actually need to do is we need to modify our vector layer mask so that the area where our HMS 2000 text is actually punched through to our frame. And the way we're going to do that is by grabbing our path selection tool and making a selection of the two paths on the vector layer mask. So we'll just make a big selection around the outside here. And now we have both paths selected, and we can see that both paths are selected because we have all these control points and all these things around our text. That tells us that the two paths are selected. Now there's an option up here where it allows us to exclude overlapping shape areas. So in this case, we have our HMS 2010, that the path is on top of our frame path. So if we choose the exclude overlapping areas, everywhere where the two paths overlap is now been excluded. So now we get the exact look that we were looking for, because now we can see our texture through our letters here, which is the HMS 2010. So we have one more design element to add, which is this little extra little design element here, which I really think adds a lot of visual interest to our frame. And so to add that, we're going to switch to a new set of custom shapes. So we're going to come into our custom shape tool here in Photoshop. We're going to come here to our shape drop down, and we're going to choose a different set of shapes. So I'm going to click on this little bitty arrow to the right, and you can see that I have all kinds of our different PhotoPerk collections, and the one that we're going to use is our Edge Flourishes Volume 1. So here's our Edge Flourishes Volume 1. And there's all kinds of different edges in here, but I'm just going to select one that I want to use. And I'm going to simply draw it out in my layout here. I can make this as large as I want. I just kind of, whatever you think looks good. And I think that looks pretty good. Now I can position this shape wherever I want to vertically. Whatever you think looks appropriate. I think that looks pretty good. Now what I want to do is any area that extends beyond the frame, top and bottom, I want to go ahead and dispose of. So we've seen that how we did that with our notebook edge. I click on our vector layer mask. I grab my rectangle tool. I choose the option here in my options to subtract from area and simply make a little rectangle. And that'll trim away the top edge, and then I do the exact same thing to the bottom elements, just like so. And then I switch back over here to my path selection tool and choose the combine option again, and then you can see what I'm left with is just that one little piece. Now I do have to complicate things just because that's just how I am. I can't leave everything too simplistic, and while it's a tiny little design detail, I do think it adds a little bit. This particular design element has just a very flat, straight, single line back to it. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to have that a little bit rough on the back edge. So, of course, we have one last step that we need to do to add that little bit of roughness. So what I'm going to do is go back into my custom shape tool. and I'm going to come down to my Photo Blocks Volume 2 again, and I'm going to choose one of these photo blocks that has a nice rough edge to it. And I just kind of browse through to one that I like, and I'm going to select this one right here, and I'm just going to go ahead and draw it out, and then we have to pick which edge that we want to use. Now for this particular example, I really like, see how this has kind of a roughened edge over here? So what I'm going to do here is on that new shape layer, I'm going to discard the areas of this shape layer that I don't need. And remember how we did that? It was with our rectangle tool, and we choose the subtract from shape area option, and I'm just going to trim off the left edge by making a little rectangle on the left, and I'm going to trim off the right edge by trimming off a little section there, and then I'm going to come in here and trim off just that last little, I just need this last little chunk here. So I just have that little tiny piece, and then again we have all these different shape pieces that we're not using, all this extra path. So we're going to go over to our path selection tool and choose combine, and now we're just left with just this little hunk. And so I'm just going to rotate that using free transform, and then I'm just going to reposition it over here to the left side of this little piece, and then again I just use free transform to resize this to the size I need. And we can kind of just fine tune. I'm just going to pull it down here a little bit, and then if I want to make it a little bit skinnier, I could probably do that too. Whatever, however you want it to look. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so I can see this a bit more detail. Actually, I think that looks pretty good. I think that's going to be just what we need. So you can see now that when I deselect, that the back edge of my little design element just has a little roughened edge to it, and I just think it just adds just a little bit detail that I think is just looks a little bit more interesting. So here's what I need to do though, is I need to take my new little design edge, and I need to choose edit copy, and then I need to paste it onto my frame layer. So I click on my vector layer mask of my frame, and I choose edit paste, and then I can delete that little section, and then I need to do the same thing to my little scroll work here. So I choose edit paste, or excuse me, edit copy, and then I can click on my frame layer and choose edit paste, and then again I could delete that little section because I don't need that anymore. Now you can see that I'm on my vector layer mask on my frame layer, and all these pieces have some overlap that I need to discard. You can see that is overlapping on my frame at the top and bottom, and where those two pieces met, there's some little overlapping going on there. So to get rid of that, I'm just going to come into my path selection tool and choose combine, and you can see now all that extra stuff has gone away. Now the one thing that I didn't do beforehand is I didn't exactly specify or move these shapes into position to define the amount of space I wanted here in the middle. So if I want to change that, I simply click on my vector layer mask and I choose the direct selection tool, and I could simply make a selection, a little rectangle selection around this area, and then I can simply use my arrow keys to slide those little bits over, and I can leave as much or as little space in between there as I like. Wow, we're done. We've created our masterpiece. Now we need to save this so we can use it again and again, and so we can share it with others. And the way to do that is simply click on our vector layer mask and choose edit, define custom shape, and we'll give it a name if you want to. I'm just going to leave it shape 1, and I click OK. So the next time I want to use my frame, I simply click on my custom shape tool. I can come in here to my custom shapes, and you can see at the bottom there is the new shape that I just created, and I just draw it out. If I hold down my shift key, I'll constrain proportions. Ta-da! There is our frame. Okay. Now, one thing that we might want to do is we have a 4:6 ratio image opening, but we might want to, what I typically do when I'm creating these types of frames, I'll go ahead and make in this case, we have a horizontal. If we rotated it vertically, we'd have a portrait, but I'd also want a square option. So what I'll do is I'll click on my shape layer. I'll go to my direct selection tool, and over here on the right, I'll select that whole area over here on the right, and we have 4 control points. And then it's just a matter of using our arrow keys once we have those control points selected, using our arrow keys to reposition. We'll just get this so it looks a bit more square shape, and then I'll go ahead and create a new shape from this. So I'll come up here to the edit, define custom shape, and then I'd have a square version as well as a 4:6 version. So then, as far as inserting an image, I'm simply going to make a selection. So then I'll come into Bridge, I'll grab a photo here, and we'll insert it using Pixel Creator. And then just to kind of finish this off, maybe I'll just come in here and add a little drop shadow on our shape layer. So anyhow, that's how to use the vector shape tools in Photoshop to create some interesting design elements. And if you have some of our PhotoPerk collections, now you have all kinds of different ways to utilize those PhotoPerks. You can create all kinds of interesting things. And if you don't have our PhotoPerks, check out the website. Look at the different design elements we have, but also check out the different freebie websites on the internet. There's a lot of good stuff out there. Yeah, you have to kind of browse a lot to find the good stuff, but there's stuff out there that you can experiment with and try utilizing some of these tools and see what you can create, because there's a lot of interesting designs that you can come up with just using the basic shapes that are available. So thanks for watching.